Hello everyone, a very good afternoon to all our esteemed guests and participants of today. I'm Muniruzzaman, welcome you all on behalf of BIPSS. Thank you so much for coming here today and to have our roundtable with DhakaTribune on Global Trends 2022. Now I would like to request Major General A.N.M. Muniruzzaman, President of BIPSS, to give his welcome remarks and to moderate the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabha. Ambassadors, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you and Assalamu alaikum. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our monthly roundtable on key strategic issues that we together host with the Dhaka Tribune. This month's topic is on Global Trends 2022. Global trends every year indicates the critical issues and scenarios that pave the way for international events that shape for the rest of the year and beyond. We live in an interconnected world, so a scenario anywhere is a scenario everywhere. So what happens in major capitals of the world has a direct impact on critical issues of policy in all states, including Bangladesh. Therefore, it is extremely important for us to understand what is going to drive 2022. We identify some critical issues regarding trade and commerce and economy. We identify critical issues of security and technology and geopolitics and strategy. As we navigate the COVID-19 and are looking for ways to get out of it, we understand that we stand at a critical juncture where there is tremendous vaccine inequity, resulting in an uneven recovery that we are projecting in 2022 and beyond. In a scenario of uneven economic recovery, there could be several economic shocks that countries, including Bangladesh, can face in the coming year. We also understand that all the trends that we are trying to analyze and understand not only has consequences, but they also have second-tier and third-tier consequences, what I would call consequences of consequences. So we need a holistic understanding of all the forces that are at play here. There are also forces of deglobalization that is turning upon us, forcing many economies to adjust in a way which is not conducive to their growth. We are in a phase where we see forces of populism driving the politics of many nations. We have grave issues of demography and the problem of aging in many developed societies and countries. At the same time, the population continues to grow globally. So the divergent forces of aging and depopulation is a critical issue that will be on the top of the agenda in the current year. We also identify that we are living in a data-driven world. Data and information will determine everything that we do. But we see increasing tendencies of data nationalism, which is again not conducive to international growth. We are going to experience this year a changed relationship between human and earth. We are at a very critical juncture post-Glasgow, how we determine our relationship with the earth where we live. So the forces of the nexus of food, water, and energy will determine many of the courses of agenda in the current year. Of course, I must say that disruptive technology will also be a critical factor to understand the events of the current year. There is now a direct linkage between technology and strategy, technology and global politics, technology and nationalism. So these factors will determine the agenda for the current year. We are in the process of what I call the global urbanization. A rapid pace of urbanization is turning the world into a different place that we will experience in the coming year and beyond, with many cities turning into megacities. And the number of megacities will probably double by the next year, many of them falling in the Asian continent. So therefore, we are going to experience a whole lot of changes in the current year. Countries like Bangladesh and many countries in other parts of the world must understand the events that are going to shape the events and the scenarios of the current year and beyond. It is important for smaller nations to understand them even better so that we are not surprised. We don't go into strategic shocks, which can completely destabilize economies, politics, and relations of a country. And finally, we can never rule out what is called black swans, unknown events that we don't know, completely forgotten events that can revisit us. What could be a black swan? The best example that comes to my mind is something like a solar geomagnetic event that can knock off the complete global satellite system in matters of minutes, leaving us without communication, leaving us without electricity, leaving us with the many of the known, understood ways or means how we communicate with each other. That could be a black swan event. So we should be all prepared for all kinds of eventualities so that we charter our course better in the current year and beyond. To discuss many of these issues in detail, we have an excellent panel this afternoon who will be deliberating on these issues in depth. So we will first start with Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, who is going to talk to us about economy and trade. Doctor, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, General, for inviting me to this August gathering and picking up a very pertinent but a complex set of issues for this afternoon discussion. Global trends. So, my grandmother told me once, and those who know heard about it already, that she said that, son, if you go to a very august gathering, never make more than 3 points. They will never remember the fourth one you said. So I will stick to my 3 points. So my 3 points today afternoon is that one of the major important dimensions of the global trend is the pandemic and vaccination. The second one is about what's happening in the economy, particularly the economic trends for 2022. And the third issue is that what it all means for Bangladesh. So these are the three issues I will seek your attention for. So let me start with the vaccination issue. So the first and foremost issue, of course, is the vaccine equity issue. Whether the vaccine equity issue will moderate in 2022 or not. That's the challenge. So as of today, if you look at the world population, then about, after this, over 6 billion people, and 75% of them have been vaccinated in the developed countries. Whereas another only 25% of the rest of the world has been vaccinated. So that will bring out the disparity in terms of vaccination process, what is going on at this moment. So in other words, 1 out of every 9 person in the developing world has been vaccinated, whereas if you, in the developed world, 2 out of every 3 person has been vaccinated. And if you go through the number of vaccines it has been administered, then you will see how the number falls dramatically. We have wide divergence, like 92-95% of vaccination rate in Cuba, whereas only 1% vaccination in Chad, or for that matter Burundi, or Democratic Republic of Congo. So will this gap reduce in the coming days or not? It seems that that reduction will take place up to a point through more intensified vaccination in certain countries, particularly in the middle-income countries, including Bangladesh. So where do Bangladesh stand at this moment? So if you look at Bangladesh, so at least 1%, at least 1 dose has been administered to 57% of the population as of today, which would be around 81% of the target population which the government has thought of. And 2 doses to close to 36% of the population, which is almost equal to the target population, because the target population was defined in a much more circumspect way. And 3 doses is 1.5%, something like that. So you also see within the country, there's a wide variation in terms of 3 doses, 2 doses, and 1 doses within the country. And this variation is much more stark. If you go through the numbers, there is a gender gap in it, because the men have been vaccinated more than the women. The urban population has been vaccinated more than the rural population. Within the rural, those who are much more difficult places to go to, they have been vaccinated much less, apart from the other issues, where there is lack of enthusiasm for that. So the global process in this case is whether it is going to facilitate in the coming days or not. The cost of the vaccine remains an enigma for most of us. We hardly know at what cost we have imported our own vaccines and what had been the administration charge, so in terms of delivery. So the global assessment says that the figure varies from $2 to $40. So it depends on the source, from $2 to $40. And the cost of delivery is no less than $4 per person. So it will be interesting to see whether in the coming years, whether this cost of production, procurement, and delivery will somehow be moderated or not. One of the school of thoughts which thinks how to do this thing is to do away with the intellectual property right restrictions. So in the WTO, the countries like South Africa, India had been moving this proposal to do away, at least temporarily, with the IP restrictions. It is known as the IP waiver proposal, which is being debated at WTO. Only last week in the General Assembly, this issue has been discussed. It is gathering momentum. US has come on board. European Union reluctantly coming on board. US has been more enthusiastic than European Union because of the production and other income issues involved. But the experts are telling that even if we relax the IP-related restriction, it doesn't mean that it will be a silver bullet for the solution as a solution, because there are still problems in terms of raw material supply for these vaccines. There are problems in terms of equipments. There are problems in terms of complexity with manufacturing, and of course, the cold chain storage and delivery itself is a great challenge in many parts of the world. So, on my first point, the conclusion is that the inequality or iniquity in vaccination process will persist. It may get moderated in certain part of the world, but with the emergence of new variants, Omicron, Delta, and God knows what will come in the future, this will remain one of the persistent problems for the global economy, and not only from the health perspective, but the socio-economic fallouts and the consequences which it will entail in that way. And Bangladesh will have to deal with it as well, because not only on the financial front, not only on procurement and distribution, but also in terms of reaching out to those who are yet to be brought under the vaccination coverage. So 2022 will, in the global agenda, vaccination will remain as one of the important challenges in the coming days. And Bangladesh will no way will be able to escape that. Coming to the economic issue, on my second point, you see, we are now in the third year of the pandemic, 2022. If we are getting into 2022, so it started off in 1920. In some cases, people will say in late 19, but in Bangladesh, we got it in March 2020. And then we had the 2021 and entering in 2022. So it's third year. If you look at these 3 years, then 20 was really a very disruptive year. If 20 was a disruptive year, then in 2021, we managed it till the middle of the year. The global economy managed it till the middle of the year. And the pessimism went up towards the second half of 2021. So the world recovery, however patchy, however, unbalanced in that way, had been there in the 2021 towards the end, the second half of 2021. Unfortunately, that optimism is withering away. So if throughout the 20 and up to the middle of 2021, we dealt with the serious fallouts or the robust pandemic onslaught, then if a year and a half, then during the second half of 2021, we saw the recovery picking up. And it also had been relevant for Bangladesh as well. But towards the end of 2021, I think this situation is undergoing a change. I will come to the elements of those changes, but which essentially means the 2022, as it was conceived or perceived in 2021, and all those optimistic projections about the global economy, as well as Bangladesh and region, are not going to withstand anymore. That is the bad news. And if you look at the World Economic Forum's projections, if you look at World Bank's projections, UN ESCAP's projection, UN DESA's projections, and also the private merchant bankers and also the credit rating agencies, all of them have moderated their forecast downward in the recent past, IMF included. So what you hear or had been hearing people earlier were based on the first 3 months data. And usually the projections are made on the first 3 months data, and then you start improving the database and the projection gets revised. People quite often get stuck to the good news and doesn't really follow the bad news coming after that. And obviously politically this becomes a major touchy point in that way. You really want to get your credentials based on the international agency's projection, although they may not have any clue what they're talking about quite often. So why these changes are happening? The changes are happening because in the world economy we are seeing a number of negative trends which are coming out. The first and foremost is that because of those initial recovery process, they created a serious supply and demand imbalance in that way. Many of the idle capacities were not being able to brought on board immediately with that kind of flexibility and that kind of a turnaround time. So it created a serious supply-demand imbalance over there. the supply chain disruption also did not go away. And the supply chain disruption and the supply-demand imbalance was most acute, as you will see in the case of supply of semiconductors. And the world economy, the world manufacturing cannot really survive without the supply of these semiconductors. So that was one of the major issues. The two issues, the supply-demand imbalance and also the issue of supply chain disruptions. Along with that came the commodity prices. The commodity prices, because of the high demand or the rising demand and inability to bring in the production and supplies in line with the demand, the commodity prices went up. The most evident area where the commodity prices went up, as you understand, was the energy sector. The oil prices started to increase, and along with that, other fuel prices, starting from LNGs and others, also went up along with that. The fuel price increase essentially led to some other consequences, which I will come to that. Along with that, the fuel prices, the other commodity prices, or alloy and nickels and all other minerals goods, which are essential for the semiconductor production and other types of production, sophisticated production, materials were of low supply. The sourcing was a major problem. That was not all of it. Along with that came the food prices increase. The food prices increase in all types of grains. Along with that came all over there. So the food prices increase, commodity prices increase in terms of fuel and others, obviously led to an increased cost of production and rising inflation globally. So you will see, if the global inflation was low throughout the decades at 2%, something like that, so it is now being projected to be around 5%. So, and it will not get moderated throughout the 2022 till the production comes in line with the demand, and we might see some respite only in 2023. Please remember these points when I come back again to Bangladesh on these issues. The consequence, the commodity prices increase and this disruption in supplies was also created by the fact that the manufacturing, post-pandemic manufacturing was also undergoing structural change. First and foremost, in order to reduce their costs, they wanted to reduce the inventory cost, so the storage cost of all the manufacturing. As a result, there was severe pressure also on the transportation system. The maritime transport costs have gone up significantly in this period. And those who are dependent on imported goods, whether it is rice, whether it is oil, whether it is raw materials for garments or whatever it is, they have to pay not only the higher price of the cotton, but also in terms of higher prices of the shipments and other things over there. So that is a major thing which is happening, a new consolidation process within the manufacturing sector that as we see. So in the coming days, what we will see more is for the international economy, the issue is about commodity prices going up. It is about cost of productions going up. It is about the shipment costs going up, logistics becoming costlier, and definitely inflation is the villain of the piece. At the end of the day, after protracted period of very subdued inflation, possibly for the first time, the world economy is facing the inflationary challenge. The demon is once again out of its cave, possibly. And if you look at these things as they are unfolding, they have other fiscal implications, because in order to contain the inflation, the well-known mechanism for the economists, and particularly the beloved method for the monetarists, is that you control your fiscal expansion, which was so important in terms of dealing with the post-pandemic demand shortfall. The demand shortfall coming from the private side was really contained through public investment. This was a global consensus that we need to go for an expansionary policies, and we I will come to Bangladesh, but in globally it was there. As a result, in most of these countries, the central banks are now resorting to increasing the cost of lending, which means increasing the interest rate. With the developed world increasing the interest rate, so what we see is essentially, and the private capital relocating itself, diversion to the more developed economies than to the developing economies. So the financial flow, which appeared to be quite neutral in the earlier years, all of a sudden is feeling the pressure of going more to the developed countries than to the developing world. So the financial liquidity issue is becoming a major issue also for the trade, and not to talk about investment and foreign direct investment on that. So I will not further elaborate on these issues. We can discuss if you have more interest on this. But the global trade and global growth will remain high, will remain positive, not high, will remain positive, but it will not be as it was conceived at least 3 months back. And this will have implication in terms of fiscal policy changes, monetary policy changes in the developed countries, and it will have inflationary impact, no doubt about that, accordingly, as you will see. So what does all these things mean for Bangladesh? So Bangladesh, as you know, is a very globalized country now. At least 60% of our economy is now linked to the global economy, if not more. This includes exports, imports, FDI, remittances, and ODA, the Overseas Development Official Development Assistance. So if you add them up, they would be 60 to 70%, depending upon the flows of remittances, how it goes up and down, and etc. So in certain ways, Bangladesh economy is more linked to the global economy in certain ways than it is linked to its domestic economy in that way. So the backward linkages are not necessarily as strong with the domestic economy as it should have been. Although these external economies interlinkages do have downward, backward pressures or implications, but it is not as strong as one would have loved to see. So what is happening in these 4 areas, as you will see? You know, a couple of months back, I made a comment and created a lot of stir at that time. Back in September last year, I said the magic of the remittance flow is withering away or going out. I think many, including the finance minister, took it upon himself to contest me, but the subsequent figures have shown us how it has gone down. So if you look at the last 4 months, the data we have for July, August, September, up to November, the 5 months. So if during those 5 months in 2021 fiscal year, we got almost $11 billion, we now have $8.6 billion for that same period. So significant downward trend in that way. There is no optimism at this moment regarding this trend will go up above as high as it was in 1920, when we said that people were bringing in more because of the last savings and also because of the 2.5% incentive provided for the exchange rate. And that was really the case, and we are now, and this is one of the major issues. This issue, I think people think in terms of foreign exchange reserve and in foreign exchange flow, etc. I think the major issue is that it is going to have significant implication in our consumption demand. Because of this, how it is going to finance the rural economy, the consumptions over there, including the health expenditure, education expenditure, and how it will impact on the poverty circumstances, and particularly for the new poor. As you know, we have defined the new poor, not the traditional poor, are those returning migrants find work overseas again to go back, and also within the country at this moment. So remittance remains one of the, deciding determinants how it will do not only in terms of external, but also in our domestic economic circumstances as it goes. The other part of it is, of course, trade. We are very enthusiastic or jubilant about the fantastic export growth in the recent past, but we quite often forget the larger part, incremental part of this export growth is because of rise in commodity prices. Because of the cotton price has gone up, and we import those cottons and yarn, and then we send them out. So obviously those prices are built into that export prices. So it is not because we have gained more competitiveness and exporting more, but because the cost of production has gone up and we are having much more thinner margin in exporting the garments products globally over there. So if you look at now the trade part, and we also forget that every export, possibly $1 export, has 75 to 60 cents of imports behind it. And as a result, we see the import has been going up very strongly along with the imports for our mega projects and other things. I will do that. So, so this one has become a major issue over there. And the trade deficit, if it was only $5 billion last year, for the first 5 months, it is $12 billion this year at this moment. So the trade deficit will increase, and you will see the current account deficit is similarly is at its highest level, almost $6.2 billion of deficit at this moment, which may go up by the end of the year to $10 billion in that way. So what are the implications in terms of all these things? And the balance of payment in general has deteriorated further. We are having, if last year at that time we had $2 billion, it is now $5 billion at this moment. And it will increase tremendously because of the imports which are going to happen and increased commodity prices. So let me conclude by what exactly stands for Bangladesh under the circumstances. Bangladesh is already feeling the pressure because of the high demand on import and lower inflow of remittances and lower exports vis-a-vis that. So the foreign exchange is under tremendous pressure, at the rate is under tremendous pressure. You are seeing in the car market, the difference is increasing. The government is trying to deal with it through the incentives, is expanding its scope, but this is not a viable option in the future. Because at the end of the day, we need a competitive exchange rate policy in order to adjust to the realistic or effective situation as we have. Dual exchange rate de facto doing is no good economics, as we all know from the Pakistan period and thereafter. So the other part of it is that if exchange rate is under pressure, and we think that because of the high exchange rate pressure, if we devalue, then the inflation will get fueled. So we are reticent about that. But the issue is that the inflation rate is also increasing, not so much because of the exchange rate, but because of your cost of production and other issues which are involved over there, the inefficiencies within the economy and the lower productivity of labor which we have at this moment. I won't go into the details how the labor productivity is almost half of our competing countries, starting from Vietnam and other things. So in economics, we say we have this devil's trilemma. You have to manage three things at the same time: exchange rate, inflation, and the third one is interest rate. Till now, the government is not conceding of increasing the interest rate because it has this peculiar idea that the interest rate is the major problem in holding back investment, which it is not. Our studies have shown that. It is other cost of doing business which affects much more the enabling environment and etc. and logistics than the interest rate in terms of holding back investment. So the government at certain point will have to deal with interest rate adjustment upward, as it has been holding it this 9.6 as it over there. So government is at the same time will be also under pressure to do the public finance in the right way. 2022 will demand much more dynamic macroeconomic management. Unfortunately, this is my personal opinion, I see the macroeconomic management is at autopilot at this moment. The macroeconomic management is on autopilot because separate parts of the organizations are dealing with it separately, and it was most epitomized through the adjustment of the fuel prices without coordination and anything else. So, to conclude, in the coming 2022, Bangladesh will have to keep a strong, vigilance on its external front, remittance, FDI marginally, and export imports. And only good news on that part is that we have more foreign aid this year than in earlier years. So foreign aid have been a welcome development, and in the coming days, it will have to continue with its fiscal policies of supporting the poor, disadvantaged, and post-pandemic recovery. For that, it will have to do some structural reforms, improving the efficiencies, and in general, looking into the domestic economy, how to prop up its demand and complement the fall in exports, if any, in the future. So I think for 2022, I think it's any finance minister's dream to manage dynamically and show results. But that would mean undoing the autopilot. Thank you.
Thank you. Your message has been quite sobering, if I understand that correctly. And I understand that we will be facing multiple challenges in the current year financially, and we'll be under severe pressures on the fiscal front, on other fronts as well. There is also the triple challenges of inflation, commodity price hike, and also debt levels increasing in many countries, including Bangladesh. So therefore, 22 is going to be a year for challenge in Bangladesh. But in our next segment, we're going to hear from Shafqat about technology and security. You might ask why technology has been linked with security. In the emerging technology world, everything that emerges has direct linkages and connotations to security. And therefore, we today live in a technopolar world. In the technopolar world, everything has got strategic and security implications. To talk about these issues, I will now request Shafqat to take the floor and give us his thoughts and ideas on security and technology. Shafqat, you have the floor.
Thank you. We just heard an excellent presentation on the economic trends and the challenges that Bangladesh could face. So I now have a rather daunting task of weaving security and technology and the trends that we see in 2022. Let me first talk about the security trends as I see them. I divide security trends in 5 parts. To start with potential security flashpoints, then to talk about new domains of warfare, the transference of strategic tensions from land to the sea, hybrid warfare, and lastly, unabated arms race. And then we'll come to technology later. But potential flashpoints itself can be broken down into multiple ways. Now, a conversation on the 30th of January 2022 about potential security flashpoints cannot start or finish without talking about Ukraine. So as we speak, the Russian and Ukrainian forces are eyeball to eyeball with one another. And although we have heard time and again that there will be no conflict, especially from Russia, but the tension remains quite high. But I think it's important for us to look at both viewpoints. And from the Russian side, we have heard that President Putin has said that their security concerns need to be heard and addressed. Au contraire, on the American side, we have heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that any conflict between Russia and Ukraine will have very disastrous consequences. So we here in Dhaka hope that ultimately good sense will prevail and conflict can be avoided. We now move to the Taiwan Straits, the other potential security flashpoint that we are studying in 2022. Now, you might ask me that why are we talking about Taiwan Strait, because it's not a new issue, and I agree it's not a new issue. But of late, and most recently as of yesterday, if you see the Chinese ambassador to the United States' statement, it tells us that the Taiwan Strait is once again back in the front burner in terms of security thinking. And especially there's a growing fear in Beijing that there are strong forces emerging in Taiwan who advocate for independence, and that could lead to a potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And I do not need to belabor on the point that any conflict in the Taiwan Strait has significant economic ramifications, including for us. The third flashpoint that I want to look at has direct consequences for Bangladesh, and that is the border between China and India. And we have seen over the last couple of years several incidents taking place between India and China. We saw the clashes in the Galwan Valley. In 2017, we saw the standoff at Doklam. Although I might say that we have now reached a stage of a stalemate, and some of the talks have been fairly fruitful, but fear remains that the border between China and India could again go hot, particularly in the area of Arunachal Pradesh or the disputed McMahon line, so which has direct consequences for Bangladesh, and that is an issue we have to observe very carefully. The Korean Peninsula never really quite goes out of the news cycle, and just today we saw the news about the launch of the intermediate range ballistic missile by North Korea. And again, we are seeing accelerated testing of missiles, and the sort of bonhomie that was created, particularly in the Trump era, of finding a potential peaceful solution has kind of withered away. So the Korean Peninsula is very much back in our attention. And for countries in North Asia, Korean Peninsula continues to remain a major security flashpoint. Lastly, when we talk about security flashpoints, I want to round up by talking about the South China Sea, which has remained a problematic for quite some time. But of late, we are again seeing renewed tensions in the South China Sea. And as we look ahead towards 2022, the South China Sea will continue to remain a flashpoint. Let us now turn to new domains of warfare. The nature of warfare, ladies and gentlemen, is changing fundamentally. And we already have the introduction of the fifth domain of war, or cyberspace. But we are seeing contestations emerging in space. We are seeing new variants of information operations, and warfare morphing into multiple different variants. And I will talk about hybrid war in a bit. But the traditional concept of warfare as we have known it for millennia is going through a fundamental shift, and especially with the increasing militarization of space. We are also noticing tensions shifting from the domain of land to the sea. And nowhere perhaps it is more pertinent than in the Indian Ocean region, which is our patch in the maritime domain. We are seeing increasing strategic competition in the oceans, particularly as the rise of powers is happening. And in the Indian Ocean in particular, we see increasing competition between China and also with other Indian Ocean littoral countries and countries outside the Indian Ocean littoral. We have competing strategies developing in the Indian Ocean. We have several new naval exercises happening. For instance, a major naval exercise is happening between Russia, China, and Iran, which has caused a bit of a stir lately. And I would argue that contentions would continue in the maritime domain as competing claims emerge, new powers rise, and new permutations and combinations of or calibrations of power take place around the oceans. Fourth, we look at hybrid warfare, or what has been more popularly known as the Valery Gerasimov doctrine. BIPSS is one of the few think tanks, I would say, in Bangladesh and in the region, which has actually spent quite a bit of time and energy in studying hybrid warfare, and especially what it means. The way we see it, that hybrid warfare is coming as a game changer. And we are seeing that, we have seen that in many places. We are seeing part of that in Ukraine as well, where multiple applications of different ways of warfare are emerging. So it's not just militaries fighting each other, but it's an employment of political warfare, of a deployment of disinformation, of irregular warfare, extending malign influence, and so on. Now, you might ask me whether hybrid warfare is something completely new. Perhaps some of these concepts have existed for quite some time, but we have never seen their concerted application like the way we see now. And in coming conflicts, we are probably going to see a greater deployment of hybrid warfare. And for us in Bangladesh in particular, it is very important to understand and study what hybrid warfare means for us. Lastly, in terms of security trends, we see an unabated arms race. Despite all our progress on disarmament and non-proliferation, we are seeing an unabated arms race in terms of both conventional and nuclear weapons picking up again. We hear about hypersonic weapons being developed by China. We hear about circular delivery is also being tested with weapons orbiting across the earth and then trying circular delivery. So all this new developments in weapons development will actually create an arms race which has multiple security consequences for all countries in our region, and this is something in Bangladesh we have to study quite keenly. Let us now take a look at some of the technology trends and then see how they interplay with security. No discussion, ladies and gentlemen, on technology today is complete without talking about artificial intelligence. AI will essentially determine everything that we do in the coming days. Whether it's peaceful use of AI for surveillance, or warfare, AI will be a very important determinant technologically of our future. And particularly for countries like Bangladesh, we have to really study and understand how well we can integrate AI into our daily lives, because other countries are already starting to do that. So we have a lot of catching up to do. We're also in an era, and President BIPSS earlier talked about disruptive technologies. And related to that, we're also in an era where we have autonomous weapon systems coming into the horizon. So we are entering a phase of warfare where humans no longer will be the only delivery or decision-making mechanism. We're entering an era where we will have killer drones, where drones will acquire target and make the decision of engagement basically on its own judgment. Now that throws up a whole question of ethics and laws of warfare. That also throws up a whole question where we are controlling technology or technology is controlling us. So that is something we have to really understand, and it has tremendous security ramifications. Coupled with autonomous weapon systems, we also have the rise of robotics. And robotics is going to rise at a very rapid pace. Robotics, when I talk about robotics, I'm not just talking about the employment of robotics in warfare, but also the employment of robotics in terms of system of production, consumption, and delivery, which will ultimately become dependent on robots. And for countries like ours, which are labor-intensive, export-dependent, this has direct connotations in terms of future of work. Some of you will recollect in 2019, in another era, pre-COVID, we had a major conference on digitalization, where we were one of the few few organizations to look at the concept of future of work quite early on. And I think there needs to be a lot more work done in Bangladesh on this issue, that with greater inclusion of robotics and technology, what does future of work look like for countries like Bangladesh? We're also entering an era, ladies and gentlemen, where our digital universe will be completely altered by what is now known as metaverse. We will have an era of augmented reality, where many of our interactions in the internet would be very different from the kind of interactions and the kind of activities we have now. I don't want to get lost in technical jargons, but we are increasingly going to have a situation where our ability to adapt in the metaverse would be as important as our ability to adapt in terra firma. So we are talking about a pace of technological advancement which is largely unfathomable. We are already talking about 5G, some countries are even talking about 6G. And for metaverse to be implemented, 5G plus internet would be absolutely necessary. So for countries like Bangladesh, it is absolutely critical that we begin our work early in this area so that we don't get lost or we don't get behind in the technological race. We are also looking at an period where quantum computing and machine learning will virtually dominate whatever we do. So the way we impart education, the way we interact with one another on the internet, particularly in terms of sharing knowledge and information, will alter significantly. And therefore, being ahead of the curve in terms of these technological developments is absolutely crucial for countries like Bangladesh. It is also important for us to understand that getting ahead in terms of technology is not just about finances or not just about resources. It is also a lot about innovation. And therefore, as these technological advancements take place, it is absolutely important for us to remain ahead of the curve, to have out-of-the-box thinking, and to have a whole of government and whole of society approach towards integrating some of these changes. And going back to the security trends, while Ukraine might be very far for us, excuse me, or the Korean Peninsula might seem very remote, but whatever happens in any of these global flashpoints will ultimately affect Bangladesh. So for us, these discussions are very important because in this interconnected world, what happens in one region does not remain confined to that region only. So these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share. I'll stop there and come back again during Q&A. Thank you very much.
Shafqat, thank you. For covering for us a very wide area of security and technology. Some of the key takeaways that I see from your presentation is that we are at a crossroad. We are at a crossroad when there are really chances of many of these potential flashpoints going hot. And if they go hot, then it has global consequences, including consequences on Bangladesh. At least of the 5 possible flashpoints, 3 are in Asia, which has direct consequences for us. The Indo-Chinese border potential conflict is just next door and directly affects Bangladesh. So we need to understand and analyze these issues in depth. I also see your contention about robotics coming in full force, which is about to happen or is happening, that will directly affect the future of work in Bangladesh, particularly in a labor-intensive country. With a single export-driven economy, it can have devastating consequences, and that we must remember. Earlier on, I talked about second-tier or third-tier consequences of issues. If there is a conflict in Ukraine, for example, the Russian planes and Ukraine together is source of 37% of the global wheat export. So the food prices are going to hit absolutely above the ceiling, which will have direct consequences for global food security and regional and international stability. So that's the consequences that we are talking about, and we all need to understand that. I'm also happy that you did point out about the metaverse. That is the world we are entering now in 2022. The internet is going to total transformation. We will not be entering the internet as a remote person anymore, but we will immerse ourselves into the internet through a second life. And that is the metaverse, the augmented reality world that will exist for all of us. And this is the world we need to understand. Therefore, I said that technology is going to drive everything that we do in the world, including security. So thank you very much for elaborating some of the key parts there. In our next segment, we are going to hear about geopolitics and strategy. And I could not think of any person better to explain this to us than our good professor, Dr. Lailufur Yasmin from the Department of International Relations in Dhaka University. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your kind words. I often tend to go a bit speedily, so if you want, you can interrupt me. Okay, the topic today was given to me was strategic and geopolitical trends. I have sort of edited it a little bit by calling it strategic and geopolitical and geoeconomic trends. My previous two speakers have solely, emphasized on economic issue and also security and technological issues. I'm afraid my points will somehow overlap a little bit, although I'll try to differentiate in light of what they have already presented, they have analyzed. Although Sir has started by saying that more than 3 points often convolute our understanding, I'm afraid I have 5 points to talk about. So first would be geoeconomic aspects. Second would be environmental consequences. Then would be geopolitical issue. Of course, here I would pay more attention. And then what are the social features that will have strategic implication for countries? And last but not the least, on some of the technological issues which are entirely different than what Shafqat has already talked about. So when we are talking about geoeconomics, what are the strategic and geopolitical implications of that? We often, as Sar and Shafqat has also pointed out, that we often forget a chaos theory coming from mathematics presented in 1970s about complex interdependence and the butterfly effect. The flapping of butterfly in Africa, for example, will it have any impact in the activities being carried out in Brazil? Unfortunately, with COVID-19, the theory did not remain confined to mathematics only, but also in our day-to-day life. And look at ourselves today. We are each of us are being affected by this flapping of butterfly in Wuhan, and now we are economics, politics, societal aspects, all are being challenged. So when we are talking about geoeconomics and its implications, a number of studies tell us that the size of the global economy will be 2.3% smaller in 2024 than it would have been had there not been the pandemic. So we are already shrinking size of the global economy significantly. With it comes insular policies taken by different countries. Obviously, for them, for any of us, our nationals, our citizens take precedence over helping out the others. In this context, I would like to bring out that their involvement in different charities, in different aid programs, and different donations that will significantly decrease, which will have implications, especially in the case of refugees, and in the case of Bangladesh, we have FDMN and their future. So we can see that how this economic contraction, it will have a greater impact, and that will also bring a greater strategic and geopolitical implications. Now let's come to environmental issue. We know that in the case of environmental issues, a number of points can be talked about, but the recent climate action failure, and then extreme weather condition, and biodiversity loss, apart from other issues, how this will have implications in 2022, only time will tell, because on environmental issues it's very difficult to predict something, and we can see the implications already on Maldives. We can see implications in America right now, how winter has been delayed, and also in the case of Bangladesh, as we are shivering, some of us are shivering, we can see how winter is being delayed. The whole cycle of winter pattern, or weather pattern, this has changed, and we are seeing more extreme weathers, extreme winter and extreme summer. So this environmental impact will have long-term implications, because not only about how countries take policies, but also how they have to prioritize and they will have to look after environmental refugees, a category that is not legally, that does not fall under international legal criteria. But there are not only IDPs, internally displaced rural-based population, but there are people going, crossing, boundaries from one country to the other, being compelled to do so. So this is something we often pay very little attention to. Then let me come to let me focus on geopolitical issues. There are a number of issues. First of all, international order. Shafqat has talked about Ukraine issues. So there are a number of frozen conflicts that we often forget to pay attention to. Ukraine is one of those frozen conflicts. There is conflicts within within Russia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and those other areas. There are frozen conflicts in Korean Peninsula. There are conflicts in China, Taiwan. All of these have greater implications for Bangladesh and as well as for the rest of the world, because any sort of conflict taking place in one part of the world that will have today or tomorrow will reach to us and to other completely on the different corner of the world. So there are frozen conflicts. Then international order. We do not see any responsible power or locations of power more solid as we have seen in the 20th century. So here, who is the responsible power who is going to take into account of how a rule-based international system will be followed, and who is defining rule-based international system? Rule-based international system, does it include democracy, semi-democracy, or what are the ways freedom of speech is going to be ensured in this particular rule-based system? Then another issue which also has been pointed out, that instead of land-centric geopolitical issues, we are increasingly moving forward to maritime-centric geopolitical issues. Here we can see both China and America in their two ocean policy, they are emphasizing on Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So therefore, we need to look into that, how conflict is coming more towards the Bay of Bengal and what are the implications that can have for Bangladesh. For Bangladesh in particular, not only traditional sources of insecurity lies there, but also non-traditional sources of insecurity lie there. For example, IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Then there are petty piracy, maritime piracy in the Bay of Bengal. All of these issues will take, in the absence of a rule-based international order, they will only intensify for Bangladesh. And for Bangladesh being chair of IORA, it has a bigger chance this time to talk about some kind of cooperative mechanism where states can cooperate, and not only states but non-state actors, and how we can bring in all those stakeholders in the conversation. Then once again, in international order, what we have seen, AUKUS and its implications, that we are seeing more and more attention being paid to short-term security issues, short-term integration, short-term alliances, and what are the long-term implications of this? Very few are paying attention to that, and therefore we need to look into how international order is gradually changing and being volatile and unstable. So AUKUS has brought security issues and arms race not only to Asia but has also to some extent dethroned the centrality of Asia in talking about its own issues. So we need to look into these particular areas as well. Here also, another issue, let me go to the next point, is that social features that we are not paying attention to, which will have both geostrategic and geoeconomic implications. For example, social cohesion erosion, livelihood crisis, mental health deterioration, and graying of the great world, the great powers. The last point, where we can see the number of aging population is increasing in the Western countries, and at the same time, how we can see there is a barrier to migration to these countries. So how great powers are going to tackle their graying population in the coming years. So this is something very less talked about issue, but this social feature, especially during the pandemic, as Bangladesh is also planning now and taking active initiative to export semi-skilled manpower instead of only exporting its unskilled manpower. That is another area, another option has opened up for least developing countries. So now this phrase global Cinderellas, this is coming into more in vogue, because now great powers need their aging population to be taken care of by these global Cinderellas coming from Southeast Asian countries or South Asian countries. Then we need to talk about mental health issues. In a report published in this year, in 2021 alone, more than 100 of Dhaka, different university students have committed suicide. And this is not the first time that this is happening, but maybe we have overlooked these issues in the past. But with the joblessness that has been happening in Bangladesh and throughout the world, we need to look into how mental health condition is deteriorating. This is connected with the geo-economic aspect, because this pandemic is much different than any other pandemics that or economic state of the world that we have witnessed before, especially during the economic shock of 2007 and 2008, because this time this pandemic is leaving long-term implications. We are seeing long COVID happening. We are seeing people are not inclined to go back to 9-to-5 jobs. So we need to think about new format that would be acceptable for job market as well. And what happens if people are giving up jobs? Yesterday there were two reports. I think UK has a very high number of inflation this year, 5.4% if I'm not wrong. And not only that, there was a very touchy story that was published, that food donation in UK, and people, when they whereas they used to donate in a large amount of food in the food banks, but now they are coming up with just a can of can of peas, can of some other vegetables, because their capacity to donate, this is also decreasing. So overall, the idea of empathy, because people just simply cannot do it because they are jobless now. They need to fend for their own families first and then look after others. So this is not only happening in UK but also in other parts of the world. So we need to look into how the geo-economic issues aspects, the rising trend of economic loss in different countries. It has connected with social fees taking place in different countries as well. Then last but not the least, I would talk about technological aspects, where digital dependency has increased to such a level that it has multifaceted implications. Not only we are talking about people needing more medical professionals for their eyes, because we are spending more time in front of the screens, but also this has other different kind of implications. For example, we are seeing that how digital dependency is leading to not only in-house jobs, but also in some cases entrepreneurship. In these cases, how this has these kind of jobs are being lost. And at the same time, I would talk about another aspect, space, which has been covered by Shafqat a little bit, but there has been increasing rise in public and private sector in militarization of the space and race in the space. So what are the kind of implications of this will have in this year, especially with this the first time that a man-made object is going to crash on the surface of the moon, and something that we will not be able to witness because it's going to happen on the other side of the moon. So this is something that we need to think about, and we know that a number of activities are regarding space exploration is going to increase, but how to have a handle on private activities as well as public activities, this is something we need to pay attention to. Last but not the least, I would come to a number of conflicts that is happening in Africa, and we often think that it is at the bay of world politics. For example, Somali civil war, Eritrean-Ethiopian war, what is happening in Burkina Faso, all of these will have a different kind of implications, but often we think that it is happening in a continent that is far away from us, but this will have once again a long-term implications. Then again, when we are talking about strategic issues, geopolitical trends, we need to look into how geo-economic confrontations are also coming with BRI and the idea about debt trap, which fortunately for Bangladesh it has not happened yet, and also how far this has any validity. That is something we need to look into. For countries like Bangladesh, what are the options in the coming years? Many of us, we forget that Bangladesh has been able to develop itself using its own resources. And just a while ago, I was having a talk with Debapriya sir, and we were talking that how within Bangladesh during 2020, 2021, we have Bangladesh is one of the few countries where very few people have died out of hunger. The prediction that World Food Program had a number of how food scarcity will increase, but this has been proven quite wrong for Bangladesh. Why? Because within Bangladesh a system has developed, for example, in developing its own farm agriculture, in developing its fishing industries, and in multifaceted areas, money has circulated within the economy. So this is something we have often failed to pay attention to, and that is why in Bangladesh we have been able to sustain despite some of the countries have not been able to respond to the challenges of the pandemic as well as Bangladesh has been. With a number of points, and if you have any questions, certainly I would be happy to answer to, but I'll end with that it is very difficult to give prediction about what is going to happen, because the Ukraine issue was not much in the discussion in 2021. And I'll just read from a list. The Economist Intelligence Unit has given a list of 10 issues to look forward to in 2022. And in none of these 10 issues Ukraine is listed there, and also none of those 10 issues, no African conflicts are listed there. So often we take very top-down approach in looking into issues. That this is something we need to get out of this mentality, that we need to look into from regional perspective and then go to global perspective. I overheard a talk before that this program today is talking about global challenges, not regional challenges that Bangladesh is going to experience. But here again, Bangladesh is not at the bay of or at the end or at the receiving end as it used to be 50 years back, something that we have been talking in past in 2021, and a lot that a country which has traveled through 50 years of its sovereign existence, it is time for Bangladesh to take a look at global issues rather than confining itself within the regional issues. Although Bangladesh has been called as a emerging middle power by David Brewster and a number of other pat in the back we are hearing from different scholars writing from different parts of the world, but it's time that we also from Bangladesh start talking about global issues, because whatever happening in Ukraine, whatever happening in Africa, whatever is happening in China, all of these, they have an impact on Bangladesh directly or indirectly. So Bangladesh is not at the recipient end anymore. It is very much interested about what is happening in different parts of the world, and therefore we need more of this kind of strategic talks about and futuristic discussions that BIPSS has ventured to take up on. So I thank BIPSS for doing that, and I hope more of this kind of talks will take place in future. Thank you very much.
Dr. Yasmin, thank you very much for painting a very large picture of the landscape of geopolitics and strategy and the interactions between the two. I now have the pleasure to open the floor for our participants and audience. Just a few house rules. Please introduce yourself when you want to ask a question or make an observation. Please be very brief. And I would also like to remind you that everything we are speaking here today is on record, because everything that is discussed here will also come out in a supplement by our co-sponsor organization, DhakaTribune, and it should be out in about a week's time. So with that, the floor is open. And the first question is Professor Basi from East West University.
Thank you, sir. And let me tell you, it's a relief that I'm cherishing the freedom to ask questions. And again, first of all, commendations to all the three distinguished speakers. And I'll be brief because this is not about me. And it's also in the interest of the audience. 2 observations and a question each to each of the designated speakers. First of all is, again, Debapriya sir, and I would use the word sir because he has earned it. Debapriya sir has actually basically made a very commendable, succinct summary of what Bangladesh lies. And there's just 1 or 2 points that, again, I would like to add as an observation because he had paucity of time. And number 2, I've been saying this for quite some time. And there's just one question for many of the students that I teach in economics who wants to ask me, and I do not believe I have the ability to come up with a satisfactory answer, and I think you could provide to the audience. Number 1 is, we say that Bangladesh's external debt is at a manageable level. 2 years back, it was external debt to GDP ratio was 14%. Only last year, it has shot up to 19%, but still it's manageable proportions. But this is one thing that comes as a surprise, number 1, that the G20 initiative offered us debt relief and debt suspension, actually, for a period of 2 years, if I could pick it up from the newspapers. But Bangladeshi government chose not to take that debt suspension relief. And it has been estimated from World Bank, not my estimation, that we could have probably spared ourselves an expense of $330 million. So what was the logic behind this? Number 1. That's one question that has been doing the rounds. Number 2 is that we already have, and sir, even in your presentation, we have a twin deficit scenario. And also, there are impending talks of a Fed reserve hike. And if the interest rate hike does take place, and as you've also pointed out, not only there's an exchange rate effect, but there's a cost push inflationary effect, especially in terms of importing oil and food. And you've also talked about structural adjustment, which means painful economic reforms. The current government, in its 3 avatars, has been quite lucky that they have carried out expansionary demand management policies. But right now, with the pandemic in and the financial resources in not the best possible shape, would we have a stagflationary scenario? Because that is the question that comes to our mind, because reading between the lines. So that's for you. For Shafqat, or Mr. Shafqat Munir, fantastic performance on a very dry technical issue. We have to be formal. But one question over here, just only one question. Our dependence on Chinese technology is increasing, for better or for worse. We won't go into this. And if somebody had a naughty turn of mind, that's not me, we could say that the Global Magnitsky Act was imposed on Bangladesh the same day when Huawei basically signed a 5G agreement with Teletalk. Now that could be basically a spurious correlation, but we have also seen that there's been repeated Western and US reservations regarding Bangladesh's closer integration with the Chinese sphere of influence, and they have not made any bones of this. So what should our strategy be? That's the question that if you have the time to shed on. And for Professor Lailufur, again, there was a very scholarly discussion about global trends, and that's absolutely right. Though I would rather say that, again, I personally prefer the chaos theory of international relations, which is actually a better, intermediate approach as opposed to the realist approach and as opposed to the liberal view, as you have said about Robert Jervis, or for that matter, Kisan or Piper. Now, one of the things that remains over here, how will Bangladesh fare? Because, see, we are a system ineffectual state, and you are very well aware of the jargon. And I would rather say in a paper that I published that we operate like a trading state, like Rosencrantz. We can always argue about this. But because of a trade interdependence, as Dr. Debapriya had pointed out, 60 to 70%, we are dependent on foreign economy. The USA is our largest export market. And there is already talks about further sanctions which might affect our RMG exports. And there's also this over-reliance on China, necessary reliance on China for infrastructure investment. How does Bangladesh manage? Thank you.
Thank you, Pervez. The next question, Madam, you there? Yes, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Lamia. I'm representing the Danish Embassy. Thank you for the excellent comments from the floor as well. I learned a lot. My question was for Mr. Munir because of his touch on security and technology. I understand that we've talked about robotics and automation, drone weaponization, and all of this and how Bangladesh needs to be prepared. What we haven't talked about is the massive tech debt, but the human capital management that needs to be addressed in order to catch up. So if there's any thoughts or recommendations from this group or anyone here, in fact, what kind of policy strategy there should be in order to manage our tech debt?
All right. The next question here, please. Microphone here. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Myself, Major General retired Shahidul Haq. My question is actually to the panel itself. Sir, my point is that with the rise of China, the global trend is and will be driven by China. Question to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aisha Kabir from Prothomalo.
So my one of my questions is to Shafqat Munir. The picture you gave was a very almost apocalyptical picture with robotics and artificial intelligence, and you also in one of your recommendations were saying to sort of to include this in education to prepare us. So that is fine when you're talking about business, industry, in education. But there's another side which I'm not sure how far Bangladesh is prepared, and that's in our security, our military side, because even warfare and military strategies are becoming so highly technological, relying on robotics and artificial intelligence and such, which, so I really am in the dark about how Bangladesh is faring this. We might not be in active warfare, but even as a deterrent, and you can never tell in the future the way the world is going. How far is Bangladesh's military preparing for this? And for Lailufur, Yasmin, I have another question about the social aspects which you are bringing about. There was one thing I was wanting to know about, how far has this in global trends, what about human trafficking? Because that's like a huge issue nowadays, and especially with the COVID pandemic, there's been a bit lax control over this. We've seen this in our own country, in the refugee camps, not just in Bangladesh, but all over the world. So what do you think are the trends about human trafficking?
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Zahid from Aviation University, the latest addition to the list of universities in Bangladesh.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm Dr. Zahid. I work in Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Aviation and Aerospace University. So some of the questions that you have been pointing out, it relates to what we do. And we are a very new university, so robotics is very much one of our department, mechatronics, aviation engineering, these are aerospace engineering, very much, it's a public university, so very much in the forefront of our future journey in making, producing the human capital that you talked about. So, but then my question is, I also happen to be an international relations, a reader in international relations, politics and international relations. So my question to the audience, I have actually two. One, it appears to me that I'm sure most of you will agree that the world is moving towards a multipolar system, and there is no denial of that. But yet we see this multipolarity is producing, if I take the words from the speakers, is producing hotspot, democratic backsliding, hybrid warfare. So the question from an academic point of view, do you think multipolarity is supposed to be more inclusive, supposed to generate peace? Does this hypothesis seems tenable that multipolarity breeds insecurity, And from a regional perspective, it makes regional alliance building denser, determinative. And then subsequent to that, linking Bangladesh to that, under that conditions, how does Bangladesh continue pursuing a policy of friendship to all, malice to none? That would be a puzzle that I would here to have some answer to. And the other one is to our my very beloved mentor, Dr. Debapriya sir. I listened to your presentations, papers, and most recently your policy prescriptions for the COVID-19 stimulus packages. Surprisingly, there is one sector, and you mentioned about the sea transportation, but there's no mention about the air transportation. That is one sector that has actually seen growth during the COVID period in cargo transportation. The sliding of passenger demand reduced to around 60, plummeted to 65% global, but the cargo was only 8.7%. And increasingly, the airlines industries are earning their major revenue by transporting cargo. Now, do you think that merits that the incentive or the stimulus packages that we offer from the government side makes the aviation sector, particularly those who are operating cargo, more of a valid recipient of those stimulus packages? I haven't seen those in your papers that you have written with some other. That's my question, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should also thank DhakaTribune and BIPSS for taking us out of the pandemic. This is the first roundtable I'm attending over the last 2 years. I had attended some of the virtual ones. I must also thank the panel, because I thought I'll learn something about the global trends, which I have. But I have one worry in the global trends impacting on Bangladesh politics. You talked about geopolitics, economics, security, but politics is the hottest topic today. No? Democracy, human rights. US Treasury sanction was talked about, Magnitsky, right? And then today's Economist has thrown out an article which directly talks about Bangladesh state of instability. Maybe you would like to make some comments on that, the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir, you have the floor. I'll come back to you, Rusht. Next. Yes. Please be very brief. We are almost coming towards the end of the time. Yes, Mr. Zanzim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. At the outset, let me thank the organizers for organizing this very illuminating discussion. This is Jahanzeb Khan from the Pakistan High Commission. Just one comment and one question. So we're talking about the pandemic and the global situation. I think it's undoubtedly the pandemic has unleashed new trends and has exacerbated the existing ones, which include global inequalities, the technological divide, emergence of a new global power, geopolitical tensions, and so on and so forth. In that regard, I would like to point out two important trends, and then I would be seeking your views on that. Number one, there is a markedly visible trend for disregard of international law, multilateralism, and undermining of global cooperation and solidarity. And I think in that context, it is very important to point out that there was no mention of the role or the importance of the United Nations or the role of global cooperation or solidarity to address the current or existing challenges, which was conspicuously absent from the points which have been made by the distinguished panelists. Number two, the other trend which I would like to point out is the rise of far-right and fascist ideologies in different parts of the world, including in South Asia, which we believe have have the potential to undermine social stability and to undermine regional peace and stability. So we would like to have your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Shahid Akhtar. I worked in the Foreign Ministry, home and abroad, for many years. I'm now with a chamber. Well, having said that, I'll make, as you mentioned, we are under the pressure of time constraint. I'll make a generalized question instead of making it a separate question. I think we have learned a lot and talked about vast, what would make the global trends in 2022. That is the year we are just ushered in the month of January. We're still in January. And I will not go, but the biggest challenge the ILO has been talking about, that there will be over nearly 5 million unemployment in the world. I'm sure they have offices all over the world to gauge this figure. And on the other hand, we see that we need, we talked about how to send our, qualified people abroad. But what about, 100 export processing zone and high-tech parks and whatnot? Do we have qualified people in the country? There is a vast dearth of these qualified people. I don't know what preparation is, underway, but very little in the sense that we still see a large number of people coming and getting good employment opportunities in Bangladesh. And this is a big concern. And there is a vast unemployment in Bangladesh. The other day in my office, we just wanted somebody, we received very qualified people, over 300 applicants, all with very high qualified degrees. And it was very difficult to pick the right person because I'm sure they'll not fit in this job, but people have applied because there's no job in the country. So this is something which is the beginning of, the COVID, the impact of the COVID. And this is not going to go away in the coming year. This is what ILO also thinks about it. So what sort of preparations we are undertaking in this matter?
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm afraid we will not be having time for more questions, but one last question will go to any one of the young friends or students coming from the universities, because it is our endeavor at BIPSS is always to encourage our young friends to come to our events and ask questions and give your comments. So the last question goes to any of the students sitting at the back there.
Thank you so much, sir, for the floor. I am Bushra Altaf Chaudhary. I have recently graduated from East West University 2 months ago in the Department of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology. Currently, I'm serving as the content manager in a master PR. Anyways, in relation to the very important question the last sir has brought about regarding unemployment, my question is that in a survey conducted by UNICEF worldwide, they have found out that 616 million children has been affected by partial and full school closure around the world. Now coming to global trends in 2020, before we used to see that even though education system was fully open around the world and many children were out of the educated margin. Currently, even though many countries are conducting online classes and online operations in education facilities, the dropout rates of children from schools is very high. So, do you think, sir, that in the recent years to come, the unemployment rate and the rate of educated people in the country, rate of literacy, is it expected to drop, or more people will be shifting to jobs after completing college and will not be going for universities or something like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now go back to our panel. Since we have very little time, I will request each of you to take about 2.5 minutes so that we can finish on time. So we'll first go in the reverse order to Dr. Yasmin first.
Okay, thank you, sir. Number of questions were there, and some of them were directed to me. So I'm just, for the sake of time, I'm going to talk about only a few issues. One is there was a question on multipolarity. In fact, it is very difficult to state that the current world order is multipolar. Instead, a number of scholars and policymakers are calling it plurilateral, which means that, as I said during my presentation, that states are going for short-term alliances as their interests and needs for the time being suits. So it's very difficult for us to sort of term this particular system as multipolar. But yes, multipolar world may bring insecurity or also generate peace for a while. But generally, in terms of polarity, we have seen bipolar world to provide some semblance of stability in the world. Not that I'm encouraging any Cold War or any this sort of future world order, because we also have seen the repercussions of Cold War in other parts of the world. Then another question was on global governance, the role of UN and other such international cooperative mechanism. So here, in fact, when we're talking about, as I was talking about strategic and geopolitical trends, and we have seen how United Nations and international cooperation, they have been largely ineffective during this whole pandemic period. Why? I had a couple of points jotted down, but I forgot to talk about those. Vaccine hesitancy, vaccine nationalism, vaccine diplomacy, all of these, and even in fact, unfortunately, once again in UK, there has been a rise of sovereign citizens of the planet. This kind of particular mentality, and we have seen in Europe how there has been a rise of hyper-nationalism. There has been a rise protest against government decision, and the idea that government cannot take any decision about someone's body because the body is sovereign. And somehow or the other, I go back to the era of Thomas Hobbes, who wrote about Leviathan. So we are talking about, are we living in 21st century, or are we living in that 16th century, 17th century, when we are talking about that we do not need any social contract? So how will the world look in coming years if we are talking about sovereignty cannot be claimed by a state over its nationals? So this is something we have a lot of work to do in this regard. And then again, human trafficking. I think human trafficking is something that from the very beginning of humanity, we travel, whether there is a way or there is, whether there is a complicated, path to go somewhere. So human trafficking has not stopped, and they will always find different ways, very new ways, fresh ways to do that. As we have seen that how Rohingyas have found ways to travel from Cox's Bazar to Rangpur and other areas. So human trafficking, it has been going on, and the trend will continue as long as we will not be able to provide some safe, economic condition in our own countries. But then again, you can see that how in America or in Western Europe, how people are reluctant to do job over vaccine mandates. But then if those jobs are being fulfilled by migrants, but of course there is a barrier to migration in proper channel, but therefore it will only encourage this illegal human trafficking. So that will continue, I believe, with or without COVID-19 in 2022 or maybe in 20 years time. I'm not sure whether I'll be here to see that and support your this argument, but it will continue for a while, in fact. So I think I'll leave the mic to rather Shafqat.
All right, Shafqat.
Thank you. Very interesting questions. A couple of them have been directed towards me. Let me start with the point about military preparedness and technology, and I think that's an absolutely wonderful point. I'm very heartened to see that at the conclusion of the recent winter exercises, the Chief of Army Staff has categorically stated to the press that Bangladesh Army is already looking at induction of artificial intelligence in its training. So we are already thinking about it, and that's very impressive. So it would be very important for us to continue to see how we can better integrate technology into our military preparedness. Going back to Lamia's point about human capital management, I think that's also very important. Yes, you're absolutely right that we, in order to win in this tech race, we have to be very careful about how we plan in terms of our capacity building and skills development, because ultimately quite a lot of it would depend on how well we can develop our skills and what kind of skilled human resource we can send to the market, because the market's competitiveness, the market's nature is going to change fundamentally. So thank you for bringing that up. Last but not the least, Mr. Parvez Abbasi's point about 5G and whether the ramifications of it. We should be at liberty to work with everybody, but as I always want to say, it's like a human relationship. You have to go with your eyes open and be cognizant about the pitfalls and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Debapriya.
Thank you. When I was young, I mean younger, I used to think that I have the answers to all questions. Now that I am becoming a senior citizen, I have become one, I now know giving a good question is sometimes much more challenging than having the answer. So compliments to all of you for making those points. And since General Munir is not offering us dinner, so we'll have to vacate this place soon. So let me be very brief on these issues and leave the rest for some other occasion. Thank you for those very good questions, Professor Nasib, isn't it? Abbasi, Professor Abbasi. So on the debt issue, the Bangladesh also did not go for HIPC, the highly indebted countries relief arrangement. For a number of reasons. First of all, we do not qualify for that. Because of that, we have a very good track record of paying back our debts. Number two, we do not have that extreme balance of payment situation. We do have foreign exchange reserves. And more importantly, the composition of our debt is such that it does not really address much of the G20 debtors in that way. So on the debt issue, it was less than 40% till the other day. You mentioned 90%. 19. Oh no, it's crossing 40%. It's 42, 43, and my projection is that it will cross 50% more than that. There is an accounting issue, transparency issue, off-budget financing of foreign aid. So I do not see a Sri Lanka situation immediately, but one has to be very vigilant about it. Debt servicing liability is under control over there. On your twin deficit, yes, fiscal and the balance of payment issues. The major challenge is what would be the anchor of macro stability? Whether it is your exchange rate, whether it is your interest rate, or it is your inflation. My preference is inflation. Inflation will really drive the rest of the year, as I can see, and will be one of these. And if it drives for 2 more years, and this is for General Amsami, I do not understand politics. I understand economics, sometimes political economy. And then so my political economy is that any government will hate to go to an election with high inflation rate, with the cost of along with the cost of doing business. We will have a side chat afterward. On the issue of this China rising issue, you see, for me, it's a much more important thing, and that relates to the colleague from the Pakistan mission, is that whether we are having all the rise of China will contribute to strengthening of a rule-based system in the world. Will it contribute to multilateralism? So, because for countries like Bangladesh, the most important global public good is a multilateral rule-based system, wherefore we will have to look for. So, it is an open question to all of you that whether rise of China, and by 2028, it may become the largest economy in the world, although it will still remain an upper middle income country. And it is 57th in the rank of PPP in terms of per capita income. So you see, it is a very disproportionate economic structure in that way. But my interest about China is that, will it be a driver for multilateralism in the future? That's a question we need to answer. On the issue of this issue of unemployment. Where is Ambassador Shahid? Yes, that I think you have touched the most sensitive part of it in that way. At this very moment, and I go on quoting this number everywhere, and this is a pre-COVID number, that every fourth person in this country is unemployed. Underemployment is even more than that, 1/3 of it. But more importantly, this is a number, please memorize. Every third educated person is unemployed, which means the more educated you are, the higher is the propensity to remain unemployed. Let me give you just one, if I'm allowed to. Day before yesterday, BBC called me and asked, you see, the Bangladesh is doing tremendously well, but why on earth then your citizens are dying in the Mediterranean? So out of the 287 people, 273 were Bangladeshis, of which 7 died. And I told them, you see, this is and this is my last point, the nature of development is such that it is being able to cater our elites, it is being able to cater our poorest of the poor with the social safety net programs, but it is not attending to the emerging middle class. It is not attending to the educated young people at this moment. That is the major problem. Look into that. Those 273 people who are there in those containers, most of them are below 40, and they possibly have a college level education up to a point. So we are not being able to address that part in that way. Our growth narrative, our development narrative is at this moment in a denial syndrome to look into that. And that will also include the education issue, where we are seeing the dropout rates are going to increase. We will see, I run schools, I sit in the board committees, I know 20% child marriages before they went for these intermediate exams. And it will increase child labor as it has happened in the other factory which we have seen. These are all fallouts over there. So I think we have to have a bit of a reality check and come out with our future in the next year or two. And 2022 will be definitely checking our resilience to its ultimate limit in many ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This has been a very rich and fascinating discussion. So for the interest of time, I will not venture to summarize it. Rather hand over to my co-host, Mr. Zafar Sobhan, editor of DhakaTribune. Zafar, you have the floor for the last time.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for being late to the party, but I was unavoidably detained at another meeting. And it seems to me, of course, that I've been amply punished because I really feel that I've missed out from not actually listening to the first two presentations today. I think I got a feel of them from the questions in the last round, but I very much look forward to the video which we will be bringing out on our social media platforms, which will allow this discussion to go forth and be shared with the wider audience. And of course, as the General has mentioned, we will also write it up in DhakaTribune in 7 to 10 days. I think by means of summing up, which as I said is difficult to do since I wasn't here for the bulk of the discussion, all I can say is, I think we've touched on this.
Do you really need to hear everything to sum up? I thought you do that anyway.
Well, I'm still new to the game, Debapriya. So, I agree. A more able a chair or host would not even need to be there for that. But I think when we talk about Global Trends 2022, and I think this has been what the speakers in the audience have talked about, is that we can really not talk about 2022 in isolation, because this is really the start of it's sort of a new world order, a new way of doing things. And I think really it's going to be, maybe if we take a look at a horizon of the next 7 to 8 years and see where we are, 2028, 2030, that would be more helpful. I think a lot of these trends will only start becoming apparent in this year. And I think we're just now coming out of all of the changes which have been wrought because of COVID, which is really, on the one hand, put the world in deep freeze, or a lot of these trends in deep freeze for a couple of years, and on the other hand has also given us somewhat of a taste of some of the issues which will occupy our thoughts and dictate our policies, both internally, regionally, and globally coming forth. In conclusion, I should say that this is a subject, 2022 and beyond, which we try and discuss in the pages of DhakaTribune, which is one of the reasons we partner with BIPSS in this endeavor. Recently, in fact, today and yesterday were two op-ed pieces, which I'd like to bring to the attention of all of the guests and panelists here, which I think would be very worthwhile reading because they touch upon the issues we've been touching upon. The first today, which came out, was by Forrest Cookson, who is of course well known to a number of people here. Yesterday it was by Fareed Bakht, who is also a columnist we have of some repute and is always worth reading. And I, of course, I invite all of you to continue this conversation in the pages of the DhakaTribune, because I can think in this day and age of no more important conversation that we all need to be having. So once again, thank you to BIPSS for co-hosting this event. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all, our audience here.
Before we conclude, please join me in thanking our members of the panel. Give them a very big hand, please.